Well, good morning, everybody. And I've had a chat with a few folks, and you're all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, so nobody stayed too late at the reception last night. I understand my institute were the people who closed it down. Be careful, guys, okay? I think we had a great day yesterday, and I've got to thank yesterday both Ruth Onyango and Gary Stacey for really getting this off to a fantastic start. And I think yesterday's debate in the afternoon could not have gone better. I thought it was a paradigm of rationality, and I've just got to take my hats off to all the speakers. What a great job you did. Thank you so much. We've had so much feedback from the outside world who were watching this in a live feed. We've had a lot of comments, and in fact, if anybody's interested in the Twitter sphere, we actually trended to #1 yesterday, so something good was happening. So with that kind of momentum behind us, we're really looking forward to today's deliberations, and we will get into some very solid science and solid international development discussions. And I'm going to hand over now to Professor Bruce Coleman. Bruce is a professor in our Plant Sciences Department here at the University of Saskatchewan, but he's also the chair of the IITA in Nigeria, in Africa. And he's going to now officiate for the first two talks this morning. Let me just say a big thank you as well. We've had nice coffee and starters here this morning. That was provided.
And they will each have 45 minutes for their presentations. I received some advance warning that both of these gentlemen are very loquacious. However, they have guaranteed that they will not take the full 45 minutes and will allow us some time for questions. So our first speaker is Dr. Rattan Lal. And Dr. Lal is a distinguished university professor of soil science and director of the Carbon Management and Sequestration Center at The Ohio State University. Earlier in his career, Dr. Lal spent 18 years as a soil scientist at the IITA campus in Ibadan, Nigeria. Dr. Lal has received honorary degrees from 4 international universities. He has been president of 4 international organizations, and he was cited in the Thomson Reuters 2014 and 2015 list of the world's most influential scientific minds. Over his career, he's mentored more than 100 graduate students, around 50 postdoctoral researchers, and has hosted close to 150 visiting scholars from around the world. He has authored or co-authored close to 800 scientific, refereed scientific journal articles, and he's written himself 19 books, and he's edited or co-edited another 63 books. So we're very pleased this morning that we have Dr. Lal as one of our plenary speakers, and his presentation is going to be on soils.
IITA. I'm going to begin with showing you some pictures from my hometown, family going on outing. I won't repeat the exact numbers here, but a few numbers of population global are important. Current population 7.4 billion, 2050 9.7 billion, 2100 11.2 billion. Over the last 10,000 years, the number of humans has increased about 1,000-fold, from 20 million to about 7.4 billion now. And their impact is given by PAT, P population, A affluence, T technology. We're going to talk about the impact of this population. Another spiral I'd like to show you is from another hometown, Ibadan, and the population spiral for Sub-Saharan Africa, beginning to a very humble number of less than 0.1 billion, and ending up by 2020 to 1.1 billion, 2050 to 2.1 billion, 2,100 to almost 4 billion. And impact of that one, of course, is the same, much greater, both on the environment and on the natural resources. One example, in year one, we had 188 million population, cropland area 130 million hectare, pastoral and 110. By 1800, population about 1 billion, 420 million cropland, 510 pastoral land. At present, population of 7 billion, about 1,400 million cropland, 3,500 million pasture land, irrigated area, almost 300 million hectare. Global fertilizer use tremendously increasing between 50 and 2012, for example. By 2050, the fertilizer consumption of nitrogen goes from 10 million tons a year to about 236. Yesterday's excellent talk on nitrogen fixation might help some. Phosphorus goes up from 10 to about 83 by a factor of 8. That's quite serious because I have very limited resource. Potassium, and of course the total fertilizer are quite a large number. Similarly, the pesticide use worldwide about 2 million tons per year. Europe consumes 45%, US 25%, herbicides almost 50%, and others quite a lot of input of chemicals. Consequently, the cereal yield, as you expect, have gone up linearly. Unfortunately, the per capita has not. In fact, over the last 20 years, it's decreasing. I will show you another image of that. But in terms of the impact, which I'm interested in, let's talk about the human population scenario for a moment. Population 2015, 7.3 billion. We have already a figure of 9.7 and 11.2. As a result of that, of course, soil degradation, erosion are a very serious issue affecting, especially in Sub-Saharan Africa and Nigeria. I used to monitor sometime 80 tons per hectare per year at IITA, affecting about 1.1 billion hectare by water, 0.6 billion hectare by wind. Secondary salinization. This is from Faisalabad, Pakistan, irrigated area. Same problems exist many other parts of the world. 20% of all irrigated land is already affected by secondary salinization. That's another hometown picture from Ohio. The algal blooms affected by the impact of chemicals, eutrophication, the Great Lakes. You remember Toledo, what happened a couple of summers ago, 4 days, no drinking water. The urbanization problems are considerable, serious. By 2030, global urban land will increase by 152 million hectares, that's 10% of the total cropland area of the world at the moment. The loss of species as a result of that, the rate at which the species are lost, 1,000 to 10,000 species per year compared with a background rate of only 5. Deforestation. I was there very recently at current rate of about 9 million hectares per year, 7 million hectares in 2000. The size of Sri Lanka is deforested every year. The water aquifer, especially the Indus Valley, the Punjab, Haryana, and Rajasthan area, losing more than a meter a year. The North China Plain, the Ogallala aquifer, draining, depleting very rapidly indeed. And of course, the emission of greenhouse gases, which is tremendous in terms of deforestation, which is about 1 billion ton of carbon per year, the fossil fuel about 10 billion. But the number I'd like you to think about for a moment is 500 million ton, 500 gigaton, 486. Land use, conversion, has contributed carbon into the environment, out of which the soil is about 80 to 100. Those two numbers are critical because we, through management, recarbonization of the biosphere, can, must, and should put it back. The short-term global carbon cycle is important in that. Atmosphere at the moment, 840 gigaton, increasing about 5 a year. This is coming from fossil fuel, about 10. Those who think fossil fuel running out, we still have 4,000 crude on reserve. That was before the fracking part. The atmosphere absorbs about 123, that's the gross primary productivity, plant respiration 60, the net consumption Uptake by biota is about 60 that get transferred in the soil, respired back by soil respiration. Accelerated erosion is never accounted for in IPCC, contributes 1 billion ton of carbon in the atmosphere. Stop erosion. But 0.6 taken into the ocean obviously is buried. So we can actually look at this global carbon cycle. This is global. We can do it at landscape level, national level, international, regional, county, farm level, or even your plot experiments. Calculate the mean residence time, which is pool over flux, and evaluate how long does that carbon stays. So the total emissions so far, land use 486, prehistoric about 320, that's data Ruddiman. 1750 to 2010, we know contributed 136, 2010 to 2030, another 30. So 500 gigaton is emitted in the atmosphere over the historic time of agriculture. Fossil fuel compared to that is 400, and much more accurate information. But between now and 2030, the number is going to go very high. And the point that I like to make here is that the emissions from the biosphere, that 486, affects food, feed, fiber, fuel, and shelter, because we lose it. The cause of superinterglaciation indeed is that emission. The soil degradation I mentioned already. I do not know why we cannot apply the Hubert curve to this process. That means the concept of peak soil should be considered. Suitable arable agricultural land under normal conditions should be 0.25 hectare under good management system. But when that becomes less than 0.05 hectare per capita, which is true in many countries, including Bangladesh, for example, that's when the problem of land grab happens. And I do not need to explain what that means. That also causes soil refugees. So the question of endangered soils, not only just endangered species, soil, indeed the organic soils are endangered soils. You cultivate them, you lose 1 inch a year by decomposition. The global food insecurity, we certainly have made progress from about 1990 to now. The curve is going in the right direction, from more than 1,000 billion people to now at the moment about 800 million. That's the most recent information from FAO. Out of this, South Asia is a very large part, 35%, Sub-Saharan Africa about 27%, Eastern Asia, of course, including United States, and yesterday we heard even Canada, the food insecurity. In the United States, Ohio, 1 in 7 is food insecurity. It's a different kind of issue, but the important part here is the 2 billion number. That the micronutrient deficiencies, 17 essential micronutrients, they must come from a good soil, not necessarily from a pill. So the malnutrition security is very important. The Millennium Development Goal, reducing hunger to 410 million by 2015, unfortunately were not met. If we were to achieve the food security, the cereal yield average of 3.3 tons per hectare by 2025 must be 3.6, by 2050 4.3. That's the total production of cereal on the right-hand side, going from 2.2 billion tons to about 3.3. But if the diet does not change, but yesterday brought up many times, if the diet changes, the yield has to be 4.4 by 2025 and 6 by 2050, and the total production also much higher. So diet has obviously quite a lot to do with it. Now here is a point which is very important. 38% of the Earth's terrestrial surface is used for agriculture. 75% of agricultural land is allocated to raising animals, 3.7 billion hectares. 70% of the global freshwater withdrawals are used for irrigation. 30 to 35% of the total greenhouse gas emissions are contributed by agriculture, and yet 1 in 7 is hungry. 2 to 3 in 7 are malnourished. Something is absolutely wrong in spite of all that resources. So how do you meet the food demands? Some of it was discussed yesterday. We apparently produce enough food already for feeding more than 10 billion people. So what should we do? Reduce waste. The very first speaker mentioned, Ruth mentioned that. Increase access to food, that was also mentioned yesterday. Address the poverty, distribution, war, political instability, the refugee problems. Improve distribution, obviously important part. Increasing use of plant-based diet. I would prefer petri dish hamburger if that tastes well, I have no idea. Alternate source of proteins, why not insect? Accept personal responsibility. Wasting food is a crime against nature. Does not matter how you look at it. Order in a restaurant and you don't eat it, must pay for that order, double it. Increase agronomic productivity from existing land. Restore degraded lands. Enhance biological nitrogen fixation. Convert some land back to nature conservancy, not increase the land. Through sustainable intensification and restoration of soil health. I think that is the philosophy. Put land back to nature. There is no reason why Sub-Saharan Africa cannot triple the yields. We know how. The technology is there. Yesterday I did ask a question to Ruth, how? I think the political will and political stability are the serious issue that need to be addressed. No additional appropriation of land, water, resources, absolutely not. No justification, none whatsoever. Through sustainable intensification. What does that mean? Produce more from less land. Produce more per drop of water. More per unit input of fertilizer and pesticide. More per unit of energy. And of course, more per unit of carbon emission. We must make agriculture carbon neutral soon. It can be done, should be done. And that's where you reduce the input. That's where you increase the efficiency. The fertilizer, nitrogen used yesterday, figure 15 to 50%. If there's no carbon in the soil, how will that hold on to the nitrogen? So produce more from less. What is sustainable soil management? Replace what is removed. I don't care how, I don't want to get into that debate, but replace it, does not matter how. Get it done, respond widely to what is changed, and predict what will happen from the anthropogenic emissions. Enhance soil resilience. Soil's ability to bounce back is very critical, very important. So let's talk about soil carbon sequestration for a minute. When we begin from a prairie or from a forest land, convert it to agriculture, within a few years in temperate climate, 50 years at IITA, it took only 5 years to bring the carbon down to 50%. 5 years in Ibadan, 50 years in Midwest United States. If the soil erosion continues, carbon keeps depleting. If soil erosion stops, it reaches an equilibrium. At some point, if you adopt and improve technology, soil carbon reaches another equilibrium. They call it attainable potential after perhaps 25 years. You improve technology further, including biotechnology. I don't see why not. You can probably achieve a maximum potential with the original level. In some cases, you can go beyond that through innovation. It's really the slope of that line, delta y over delta x, that we need to calculate, which is the rate of change. And that rate of change is what centers like mine do. When you convert to another land use and you adopt best management practices, how do you get, what is the carbon sink capacity of the land? How much did you lose? How much can you put back? That's the part which we need to assess. What the mean residence time of the carbon when it's put in there, how long it stays. If it doesn't stay very long, what's the idea of putting it back? It doesn't do any good. And then the question is, how can you achieve it? There is no one single problem. There are 300,000 soil series. To assume that there's a one technology that can be adopted on all those 300,000 series, that's kind of being naive. Conservation agriculture, biochar, might be agroforestry, alley cropping, desertification control, drip sub-irrigation, afforestation, pasture management, water harvesting, drip sub-irrigation, improved farming, so anything, site-specific thing. What is the most sacred about it is that the carbon input into the system must exceed the output. Doesn't matter how. But that's the idea, that's the science. And each of those technology has their own carbon footprint. You must account for it. That's the only way you can get the net carbon emission. And that is sequestration is what of soil health is a very important part. We have Dr. Steve Schaefer here who will probably talk about it, which is the physical health, which is water and other characteristics, the chemical health, including nutrient dynamics and nutrient retention, the biological biodiversity of the soil, especially microbial biodiversity, the ecological characteristic, all these processes, the central key factor in the soil organic carbon at critical level, threshold level. That threshold level determines many things in the soil, physicochemical, the biochemical, the ecological, the ecophysiological. It also governs the productivity. Here's an example of soil organic carbon on the stalks, megagram per hectare on the x-axis, the yield from the pampas of the wheat in South America. And there is a threshold level. That threshold level in most soil is 1.5 to 2% in the root zone. You know what the carbon concentration of soils in Punjab is, both sides of the border? 0.01%. You know, soils of IITA, we start with 3% in 10 years. It came down to 0.1%. Yesterday we had the uptake of nitrogen 15%. If the carbon concentration in the soil is below the limit and you're dumping, for example, fertilizer and irrigation water, and you assume that the efficiency is going to be greater, not possible. That's the ingredient that keeps the nutrients held together. And if you don't have it, then you have to keep on dumping the chemicals and keep on plowing to improve soil structure and keep on adding water because soil does not have a water holding capacity anymore. You have to have that. We know the crop yield for the same management can go up 100 to 300 kilograms for corn, 20 to 50 for soybean, for every tons of additional carbon in the root zone. We need more data for it. Some of this data actually comes from IITA. Millet yield we can increase up on a global scale. Tremendous improvement can be made in soil quality. Mr. Lafol, French Minister of Agriculture in the front row, gray hairs, visited Ohio State, visited my center about a year ago. He was the one who proposed at COP21 the cather per mill, 0.4% increase in carbon in soil. It's the people like that, policymaker, who translate science into action. That's what's holding Sub-Saharan Africa back. That's what holding. I must indicate also that not only the average national average yield I'm talking about in Sub-Saharan Africa, low, in the rain-fed agriculture in South Asia and Central Asia, the same thing. It's not made progress. The progress has gone in irrigated agriculture. This is what the gentleman here is proposed for. He said, how much carbon can we put back in the soil? And that's a very important policy issue. He tried to offset oil by soil carbon sequestration. And the reason 0.4% he came is the carbon pool in the root zone, 45 and about 850 gigaton on a global scale, 0.4%, 3.6 gigaton. That was the number a policymaker needed, because over the last 10 years, the average increase in carbon in the atmosphere is about 3.5, 3.6 gigaton. So that's where he came up with the 0.4%. I hope it will be implemented at COP22. Mulching is one of the options. Very important option for soil health, because it affects the soil physical qualities, it affects chemical quality, it impacts biological quality, it impacts ecological quality. The many processes, ecosystem services, the physical-chemical, biological processes, soil structure especially, the elemental transformation, the rhizospheric processes, many things really depend on that mulch. Here's a picture from IITA. Many people think, when did IITA soil conservation experiments start? This picture in 1972. Cowpeas grown after corn. I had these experiments on a continuous basis for 17 years. We showed that erosion is practically zero in a system like this, up to 20% slope. But can you keep the carbon, can you keep that crop residue? That's the question. What are the socioeconomic conditions that a farmer under competing uses to feed it to the cattle, to build on fences and roofs and many other purposes, most important, fuel, cooking. How can you convince farmers that this is important? Unless you provide those other amenities to the farmers, the crop residue living on the land is not an option. Even in Punjab, 70% of the price of the grains is the price of the residue of wheat as a fodder. And you ask farmer to leave it back on the land, he thinks you're crazy. Unless you pay for the ecosystem services for carbon sequestration, Mr. Lafol's idea will not work. And what the price of that carbon? Price is not the market price. I'm not against economics. Market economics is important. Yesterday, everybody said, especially the so-called ex-politician, he made that point. But it's myopic. It's myopic. Price of at Chicago Climate Exchange of carbon is 10 cents a ton. That's a market demand and supply. The price of carbon, if you take the price of the residue, take nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, potassium, and convert that into humus, $120 a ton. And if a farmer sequesters 1/3 of a ton, that's $40 per hectare, $16 per acre. You pay farmers $16 per acre, they do it, especially the developing countries farmer. Otherwise, no. Otherwise, it's a slogan and nothing more. We also developed at IIT a guideline. Can no-till works everywhere? Well, if you take this climate on one side, you take soil texture on the other side, there is a quadrant where no-till will work. Another quadrant, minimum tillage will work. But somewhere, if there's a humid climate, clay soil, maybe we need some kind of ridge furrow system. So somewhere we have to develop a soil guide. It does not work everywhere. Some place we have to do other things to make it work. But in some cases, it's not a question of it works or not. It reduces 10% yield, so what? 10% yield, but you save 80 tons of topsoil. It's a very important consideration of providing. So how would a future agriculture look like? It certainly have a plan. I had in one of my slides a BT word written on that green leaf. Obviously, conservation agriculture, mixed farming system, nutrients, NPK, zinc. We met a guy from Yara this morning. They should be applied directly to the plant roots when needed, directly. And they should be absorbed in such a way that the nutrient efficiency, they are strictly for plant use and not going back in the atmosphere, not going in the environment. We do not want to do that. And to do that, we really have to have a mixture of setup where we can talk to plants. I would like plant to communicate with me. How? Through molecular-based signals. I would like plant to tell me, look, insect is biting me. Look, I'm thirsty, I'm hungry, I need nitrogen, I need phosphorus. Through the molecular-based signal, I can make intervention timely so that the crop yield is not destroyed. That's the kind of technology we have to have. Of course, we have to have soil biota that create ecosystem services, disease suppressive soils. So a plant has to look something like that. It's not just a crop residue for carbon sequestration. Crop residue requires water, requires, of course, carbon from biomass, requires nitrogen to convert into humus, phosphorus, sulfur, this coupled cycling. We have to understand those cycles together. How does intervention through putting imbalanced fertilizers, how about inappropriate irrigation or excessive tillage? How does it influence those coupled cycling? Which is important to understand. Without that, it's very difficult to generate ecosystem services that we are looking for. We should be farming soil for ecosystem services, not necessarily just only for food production. Many people ask me, how do you sequester carbon in soil? It's like a balance. And in a balance, you have gains and losses. If you want to sequester carbon, the gains by any technology, which I mentioned before, must exceed the losses due to erosion, leaching, and decomposition. That's how the carbon sequestration will happen. If your losses are more than the gains, you are having depletion, and that's what's happening most of the time. We are not putting enough carbon to take care of the losses. Here's another picture from IIT. Late Dr. Tony Juo and I set up this experiment in 1970. It was very close to the farm building size. And this was the Alfie soil. It was very flat ground. And we wanted to make sure that we remove away the crop residue that the farmers do. This picture was taken in 87, 17 after, just before I left. Unfortunately, many of these experiments are discontinued. That's a very sad part of it. But the crop was planted the same day, same variety, same fertilizer. The residue was taken away in one case in 71, and the residue is left back in the other case continuously. A few years ago, I saw the same slide with wheat at CIMMYT. I was told, say, this is unique. No, go back to IIT, see it there from the 70s. By that time, the crop yield, I don't need to tell you what the difference is. And that's because the soil in the front is dead. The microbe, the earthworm, the termites, they require food. That crop residue is their food. You take it away for biofuel production for 1,000 billion tons cellulosic ethanol idea that we have for the USDA, well, there's a price to pay. There's no such thing as a free biofuel from crop residue. Not at all, because soil biota is the bio-engine of the earth. And if you take away the crop residue indiscriminately, you pay a price. Here's another example of taking away the indiscriminate crop residue, the atmospheric brown cloud. I do not need to tell you what the impact on the health of the children, the mothers and baby which is unborn of this kind of situation is. We need to, if the soil degradation is to be reversed, this is where the action begins. Provide clean cooking fuel to the household families in the rural areas everywhere in Africa and Asia. Plant nutrients in India burnt in dung in cooking are more than the amount of chemical fertilizers used. And even then, when you put the chemical fertilizer and there's no organic matter in the soil, 0.01%, they don't stay there. Obstructive farming, when you do not replace what you remove, when you do not improve the organic carbon content, you begin with a good soil, you deplete soil organic carbon, you deplete soil structure, it leads loss of resilience, decline in ecosystem services and function, leads loss of biodiversity, microbes, as I showed you in that plot, and eventually that's what gives you hunger, malnutrition, political unrest, Boko Haram, civil strife, war and insecurity, the migrant crisis, the vicious cycle you never get out of. Think again. Soil health is the foundation on which you rest. And you take away that foundation, everything else is empty. Urban agriculture is something very important. Look at the population of New Delhi, went from 1.4 to 20 by a factor of 20. Calcutta, factor of 5. Bombay by factor of 9. Pune, Hyderabad, Bangalore, increasing tremendously. Number of cities, urbanization, very rapid. Look at the cities in Africa, Accra, gone by factor of 3, Addis. This is what is happening in Punjab. The topsoil, 1 meter of it, used for brick making. In a region, no stones, of course, it's alluvial, no forest left to build for the timber houses. The top 1 meter of soil used for brick making. Something that took 1 million years. All that organic matter, all those micronutrients gone. You're putting in a subsoil 1 meter deep, fertilizer nitrogen only sometime because it's subsidized, and think that what you're going to grow out of it and eat is nutritious. It's devoid of all the mineral elements, micronutrients. So let's think about urbanization. It takes 40,000 hectares to provide accommodation infrastructure to 1 million people. We are increasing a rate of 75 million per year. That's 3 million hectares of prime land going into urbanization. Cities of 10 million or more are 28 in 2015, there will be 41 in 2030. A city of 10 million people requires 6,000 tons of food. Remember the amount of nutrients, especially phosphorus, going into the city, not going into the back where the land came from, become a liability. We really got to stop that. We got to have produced 20 to 25% of the food grown in the city by recycling the nutrients, feeding the cities. That's the planning we got to have. 70% of the people will live in urban centers. That's the only way to do that. So, how do you summarize what to do about soil management? Sustainable soil management. First of all, we should think about causes of soil degradation. The biophysical process of soil degradation is driven by economic, social, and political forces. We know how erosion happens. We know how compaction, salinization happen. We cannot implement them in Sub-Saharan Africa because of the problem of political, social, and economic situation. They need to be addressed. Vulnerability of degradation depends on how, rather than on what is grown, how you grow something. The law number 2, when people are poverty-stricken, desperate, and hungry, they pass on their suffering to the land, period. You call a hungry people and say, don't cut that tree, forget it. Don't burn that dung, or how are they going to cook? I think that's the part which is very important to remember. First, take care of the basic necessities. And then it's not possible to take out of a soil more than what is put in. It's like a bank account. You cannot keep withdrawing without putting into it. Only by replacing what is taken can a soil be kept fertile, productive, and responsive to management. Law number 4, I'm not an economist, but I strongly believe what I said here. Marginal soils cultivated marginal inputs produce marginal yields and support marginal living. And that's the way it is. Good soils cultivated by good methods produce good yields and support good life and stable life. And take care of the soils wherever you're worried about political instability. Law number 5, organic and inorganic. I think it's a futile debate. I really think it's absolutely no question organic agriculture is better. It's the question of logistics. Can you provide those logistics enough to meet those needs? Plants cannot differentiate the nutrient supply where they come from. The strategies of producing more from less. As long as you can produce from more from less, I don't care how you do it. Combination of both. Mining carbon has the same effect on global warming, whether it's coming through burning organic matter in soil, obstructive farming, or fossil fuel, or draining peatlands. Atmosphere impact is the same. And soil can be a source or sink, depend on how you manage it. Law number 7, the potential of elite varieties can never be realized. I want to repeat that. I have absolutely nothing wrong against varieties. They are the greatest thing to have. But remember, you cannot grow varieties in sand system like we are doing in Punjab, or you try to grow in a cemented rock, which I showed you the picture. Their potential, if you want to realize it, they have to have a great media to grow into it. That's very important. Even the elite varieties cannot extract water and nutrients in soil where they do not exist. I heard yesterday about drought corn. I agree there is a drought corn. I knew that. It was called sorghum. Soil as a sink for atmospheric carbon is very important part for mitigating global warming. And of course, sustainable management soil, the engine of economic development, political stability, and transformation of rural community. Traditional knowledge, absolutely important. Develop on it. Don't throw it away. But remember, please, today's diseases cannot be cured by yesterday's medicine. Build upon it. It's not either or question. Combine the two together. So just very quickly, Mr. Chairman, I'm coming close to the end. 1715 to 1850, we had hand tools. We had about 1 billion people, less than that. Crop yields about 1 ton per hectare. I'm talking about the Midwest United States here. Many countries in developing countries are still there. In fact, most of them, whether South Asia or Sub-Saharan Africa, are still there at that point, where blue and yellow meet. 1850 to 1950, the animal power came in. The rotations came in. We went up to 4 tons per hectare. The population of 2 billion. Then came the green revolution, fertilizer, machine power, the germplasm improvement, improved variety, the dwarf varieties. The population got up to 4 million. The yield came up to about 7 tons per hectare. From 1750 to 2000, we went up to improved varieties. Biological biotechnology came in, the conservation, no-till farming, integrated nutrient management, integrated pest management. We are going to hear about push-pull things soon. Carbon sequestration, we started. Our center began somewhere in the 90s. We got a population of about 6 billion. We got yield of about 10,000. Then came about 2000, 2015, conservation agriculture, micro-irrigation, precision farming, perennial culture, complex rotation, and that's where we are. The question is, what's next? I have no clue. I think your guess is better than mine, but this is what I guess. Sustainable intensification, rhizospheric processes, disease-suppressive soils, soil-less culture. Soil is too good to waste just for one thing. Preserve it, see if we can grow without soil. The nexus approach, interconnectivity, the phytobiome management, the petri dish wheel, the insect alternate source of protein, the agriculture robots, smartphone producing communication technology. Then what happens from 2025 to 2015? Guesswork, recarbonization of the biosphere. Remember I said 500 gigaton of carbon gone. Farmscaping, insect alternate source, soil microbiome, smartphone extension, soil-less culture, space farming. We are going to have very soon people going to Mars. Do we know how soil processes function under hypogravity systems? NASA is doing experiments, but they're not soil scientists. We need to do beyond agriculture. We need to think about other things. I think we really got to produce more from less of soil. Whatever we do, we got to do. And finally, I'd like to mention soil stewardship. We really have to combine religion with science. And soil stewardship and care must be embedded in every fruit and vegetable eaten, in each grain ground into the bread consumed, in every cup of water used, in every breath of air inhaled, and in every scenic landscape cherished. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here.
Thank you, Dr. Lal. We have time for, I think, 2 or 3 questions. If those of you who want to ask questions, go to the microphone in the middle of the room. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go to the microphone.
Yeah.
Well, so everybody can hear the question.
Yeah, Pierre Herben from Yara. Thank you very much for first an excellent overview of the problems. I liked it very much, and I like also what you say about the degradation, which is okay, a predictable process, which is sometimes irreversible. And you mentioned the point at the moment of in your wheel of the marginal lands with marginal, results. But we believe, I think there is a high potential in regeneration of soils. And I think in your curve on the future, I did not see it, and I think it's important to look at how we can not only avoid degradation, but on the top, starting to regenerate and regain, I would say, soil. The desert, we have seen that in many cases it's reversible, so there are ways really to go back. And I think we need, because there are quite a vast amount of marginal lands, all the industrial lands, semi-desertic lands that could really be taken back with the knowledge and the know-how we have in hands. So I think there is also more to do in that reversibility.
I think it's a comment. I agree.
And maybe I wanted to have as well your opinion on that, and see whether you put it in your plan and what you recommend.
I agree that marginal land can be restored. Mm-hmm. I think if we focus on restoring marginal land and put them back for nature conservancy, that would be a great idea. That means prime land should be managed more properly, according to some of the concepts that I explained. So I think that's certainly a good idea. Balanced nutrient is important. I do not want to emphasize that it has to be just chemicals. Integrated nutrient management. That means recycling, compost, biological nitrogen fixation, and supplemented above that, whatever is missing through synthetic fertilizer. One thing I did not mention, and I would have liked to do that, 1 kilogram of nitrogen fertilizer by Haber-Bosch process for its manufacture, for its packing, transport, injection into the ground, cost about 2 kilograms of carbon emitted into the atmosphere. We really have to think about it. Same thing about pesticides and herbicides. 1 kilogram of active ingredient is about 5 to 6 kilograms of carbon. So minimizing them by increasing efficiency is very important.
Yeah, that's a challenge, but there is as well some potential routes for the future to address that.
Yes,
so fully agree.
Certainly.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
I'm a conventional agrologist from Germany, and I had quite a bit of education in soil science. I really appreciate and really like your presentation. I have also a great interest in plant genetics. So I'm looking at the Midwest United States agriculture system growing, well, corn after corn after corn, and sometimes corn after soybean. I would like to see your view on the sustainability of this system.
Thank you. I was a graduate student in '65 at Ohio State, and this rotation farming system was corn, soybean, meadow, pastures. Cattle were a very important component of that. I came back in '87 as a faculty member, and Dr. Fred Miller, some of you may remember him, was department head at that time. And I asked Fred, what is the most prominent farming system now, 20 years after I come back? He said the current system is corn, soybean, Florida. That's the problem. I wish that was not the case.
Okay, just got a quick question. I know you mentioned kind of urban farming, and so I'm just kind of wondering what your thoughts are on vertical farming and in a controlled environment and building upward to reduce the amount of space required. I'm just wondering if that's something you see going forward as a sustainable method for producing food, or what your thoughts are on that.
I had a slide on vertical farming, took it out. Chicago, Singapore have some of those things start. I think vertical farming is going to be a definitely component of producing 20-25% of the food to feed the cities and recycling waste. You know, when you ask children where the food come from, grocery store, that might come to be true because a grocery store may have aquaculture and upstairs greenhouse structure to grow things. I think that's a great future. I'm editing a book with Bobby Stewart coming out very soon, sometime this year. There's a specific chapter on vertical farming. Everything is on the table.
Okay, please join me in thanking Dr.